Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, and thank you everybody for being here with us today for the exciting launch of our Round 5 findings. I'm not quite sure what to say because His Honourable Chief Guest said everything that I would have wanted to say, and he said it with passion, so I don't even know how to match his passion. But I really want to just home in on some of the issues that have been raised so far to really highlight their importance. India has changed in an astonishing way in the last 2 decades since we started the study. And it's really exciting to think just how much the economic development, technological advances, as the chief guest emphasized, infrastructural development and all those sorts of elements have really made a massive difference in this country without doubt. And that's really important in terms of children's well-being. I think it's also very important to highlight the extent to which education has spread across the country and now the rates of enrollment, which are really a major achievement. So I think we really want to celebrate those successes. I think, though, it's a country of paradox because at the same time, India faces some really grave challenges. And I just want to highlight a few of those challenges. They are the ones indeed that have been raised by the Young Lives findings this morning and also emphasized by the chief guest. But I just really want to really home in on them a little bit more. So take the nutrition problem. Why does it matter so much? The nutrition problem matters not just because when children are stunted through early experiences of undernutrition and nutritional deficits and so on, but it has enormous implications for their ability to learn at school. And we have very clear evidence that the children who are stunted are behind their peers in all the tests that they take in Young Lives study. So this is really important in terms of building the human capital that India is going to depend upon for its future economy. As the chief guest said, this is not just a human rights or a human well-being problem. This is very much an economic problem for India's future. And India needs, for all its children, all the children, and in particular those who are most disadvantaged, to become active adult citizens. And they need the skills to become active adult citizens. They will not develop those skills if their nutrition continues in such serious deficit. So I really want to highlight that. And because Young Lives is able to compare 4 countries and look at the challenges faced by the 4 countries, I only discovered this last week myself. I was in Ethiopia, and I learnt that in Ethiopia, the rates of stunting in under 5 children are lower than in India. Can you imagine that? Ethiopia is one of the poorest countries in the world, and yet it's managing to bring its nutrition statistics, it's improving nutrition in a way that India has not yet managed. So this, I think, is something we really all need to be very focused on. The point about clean water and sanitation is absolutely vital. We need to worry about weaning practices. We need to worry about, obviously, food and access to healthy diets and so on. But actually, water and sanitation, clean water and sanitation will make a massive difference. And I know that the government is now really focused on these issues. So I want to celebrate that. I think that is going to help massively. Peru, which is one of the other countries in the study, Peru had a similar challenge to India at the outset of our study, but they've managed to make big inroads into their malnutrition problem. They have a very good glass of milk program, which we have found reduces undernutrition. But interestingly, it also reduces the risk of childhood obesity, overweight and obesity. And that's because it improves the basic nutrient content of the diet. And this is another issue I wanted to raise. I think we're going to see an explosion, I'm afraid, of overweight and obesity in India's children in the coming decades. It was almost non-existent in our study when we started, And now we're seeing that it's risen because we're able to compare the younger children with the older ones. We can see just how fast it's a rising problem here. And I know it's not just in India. I know this is a problem across South Asia. And we know what the outcomes are going to be in adulthood in terms of, disease, heart disease, diabetes, I expect, will rise. So I think this is something we need to grapple with. But I just want to draw your attention to the fact that ours is a pro-poor sample. And yet, even being a pro-poor sample, we do see this problem in rise in overweight and obesity in the children. That tells me that this is not just about wealthy people, urban people, people leading more affluent lifestyles. This is about malnutrition. It's primarily an urban problem. This is about poor quality diets, the rise in fast foods and things like that, and the rise in particular in animal source foods, as people do have a little bit more money, as you found from the study, they're able to access animal foodstuffs more. So it does. There's an implication there of malnutrition. So I just want to draw your attention to it because I think this is going to be a big challenge for the future. It may not seem so right now. Then I want to turn to the issue of education. I just really want to reinforce some of the messages that you've already heard this morning. Education quality is really low in India, and we're now hearing that it's at risk of declining. As more children access schools, it's hard to sustain quality. Young Lives is doing work at the moment trying to understand what it is that makes an effective school and what it is that makes schools that are not adding value to children's learning and so on. This is part of our school effectiveness research. And we are looking at the characteristics of schools and the characteristics of teachers. We're trying to understand even the peer effects. What is it to be in a classroom where other children are attending and concentrated, or in a classroom where maybe there's very high rates of absenteeism and other issues. So there's lots of factors that might influence school performance of children. And one of the things we find, which I think is unexpected and surprising, is that the government schools do struggle. They don't perform as well as the low-fee private schools in our survey. And I find this surprising because the teachers are better qualified, they're more experienced, and they're paid more. And yet, performance is lower. So there must be something about the private schools, the incentive structures, the fact perhaps that parents are more demanding because they're paying something for it. But we need to ask ourselves the extent to which we want to be encouraging a private alternative system of education or seeking to improve government education. And India actually is the only country in our study where we've seen such a dramatic rise in these low-fee private schools. It's almost as if this is now the system of choice, including, by the way, amongst our poorest families. And it's really, in the qualitative research, I find it heartbreaking that in the poorest families, you have families selling animals, selling land, and getting into really serious debt in order for their children to be able to attend private schools, when you know that the outcomes from those private schools are not necessarily going to be very significant or make a big difference. And this touches on another issue which I think we need to be concerned about. It's not just education quality, it's the relevance of education. With India's booming economy, what we need to be thinking about is not learning by rote, not just maths, command of literacy and mathematics skills and so on, but critical thinking, lateral thinking, access to digital knowledge and technologies, use of digital technology and knowledge. These things are going to be the skills requirements of the future. So we are studying that. We're not able yet to share the findings, but we will be sharing findings. So our children learning those kinds of critical thinking skills, which are going to that's what's going to make the difference for India's future economy, not just building knowledge around literacy and numeracy and so on. So that's another area of the research that I think will hopefully within the next few months really begin to tell a story about the potential for India's future. I think what we've not yet touched on very much, but the question of gender equality, early marriage of girls, and early parenting of girls, and so on. This is another issue that India stands out. Sadly, it's the only country in the study of the 4 where we find systematic bias against girls. In the other countries, we do find biases against girls, but actually, in some ways, boys are worse off than girls. So, for instance, in performance in school, in Ethiopia and in Peru, boys are not necessarily doing as well as girls. Also, their aspirations for education are not necessarily as high as girls. And in Vietnam, girls are consistently doing better in school than boys are. So I think, and I know many of you in this room actually focus on gender issues and gender equality. Clearly there's a lot more work to be done. I mean, one of the things I think is worth noting in terms of a positive is we have seen an increase in enrollment of girls. So the problem in the past for India was about girls not being enrolled and boys being enrolled in school. That problem is no longer really such a serious one. It's shifted. What we now find is that families invest more in the boys' education. So it's boys who are more likely to be in the private schools than girls. And in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, one of the incentives for being in private schools is that it's English language medium. And of course, there is the hope that this will lead to better jobs in the future. And because there isn't an expectation that girls are going to be in paid work, but they're going to get married early, there isn't the same incentive to invest in girls' education. So there's been improvement, definitely, but the problem has now shifted. It's about families' investments in their daughters. So I think that's another really important point. I think, finally, I just want to draw attention to the point that has been made several times already, inequality. We find that inequality is bad for all societies. Research makes it very clear that inequality is bad for the rich as much as it's bad for the poor. It's bad for our well-being. So it's something we need to be very, very focused on. I think it's a risk also for social unrest and for the feeling, I think as the world gets more connected, as people become more aware, they also become more aware of what they don't have and the disadvantages that they faced. Inevitably, you will get demand for better access, demand for more equality, and so on. And I think India needs to really be focused on the scheduled castes and scheduled tribe groups, who, although in our sample have definitely, their circumstances have improved over the time that we've been doing the research, they are still lagging behind across all the dimensions that we're measuring. And I know there are some wonderful proactive programs in India, some positive discrimination programs, which should be making a big difference, but they don't seem to be working at the grassroots level. So I think it's often it's up to, state and sub-state level government bodies, but it's also up to NGOs and activists to really try and make a difference at the grassroots level. Because India's legislative system, its legislation overall is really, really effective. And that's really important, but it's only a first step. And I think the realization in policy and practice is where I think we all come in as advocates and so on. And I think we need to work very closely as a community. We share the same objectives and goals. Young Lives doesn't do research for the sake of producing wonderful research papers. It does the research with the objective of changing the circumstances of children. And I just want to say thank you all for being here. I hope that we will be working with you in the future. I know with many of you we are already close partners. I know that we can only achieve the change we need to achieve by working in partnership with everybody. Thank you.